You guys, it is so fun to have Suzy Rawlins on the second podcast for Led Me to This. And there's a reason why I asked Suzy to be number two after number what first podcast being me reading the chapter in my book. My detainment story, Suzy was part of it all the way from the beginning. And some of these, she doesn't know what I'm going to ask her because I don't even know what I'm going to ask her yet. But I thought we could spend a few minutes kind of looking at it from both sides, from behind the bars to Suzy's side of it, being a friend of someone who's being detained and not necessarily understanding what's going on at that moment. And I have some questions, and I've never asked her these questions before. We've never really had the conversation, huh?
No, not really.
We've never really had the conversation. So how do you remember how you found out that I was actually being detained or incarcerated?
I do believe it was through social media, and I don't remember the person, but there was somebody who somehow found out. Like you weren't on social media, we knew that, and then somebody, I guess, gave the information. And so I was thinking about that. I was like, how did I even get her address to write her? So somebody was the connection, but I don't know who.
Interesting. And only because I do know a little bit of this part and stuff, but what are some of the things that while I was detained and behind bars and I had no access to anything, as in couldn't see what was going on, couldn't make contact and stuff, what are some of the things you saw as the ripple effect to those that were in our circle about regarding me being detained? And you can, I'm good. So let me preface this that because we've never had these conversations, and I tend to be very emotional about some of the stuff, and Suzy knows that. I am good, my friend. This is all about just letting it hit. So let it hit.
Um, the thing that was the biggest like aha to me was I watched people who had your back, and I watched people who straight up judged the situation without facts, like, and just went down this road of, I don't know, saying bad things. And I'm just like, but you don't know. Like, if you don't have I didn't have the information either, but I'm like, why would you automatically, this is the person that's inspired you, you've worked with, you've networked with, you've been friends with, you've been on coffee dates with, and all of a sudden, because they're detained, boom, I don't like them, they're a horrible person. Where does that come from? I don't understand. Everybody has a story, and we all have stuff we don't necessarily want aired out. And unfortunately, I felt like it was all aired out.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember the very first time I got back to the internet, I had no access to my profiles on social media, but I could still see my profiles and saw some of the humans that had shared my mugshot and stuff like that. And
Yes.
I have to admit, I was kind of surprised at who was doing the sharing. And again, with little to no information whatsoever.
It definitely changed my view of some of those people, because not that I think they're horrible people, but it changed, like, oh, they're super quick to judge. They're just going to jump on the bandwagon of let's judge because these people judged. And I still look at some of those people completely different.
Interesting. So you and your mom came to visit me twice in Eloy, and I remember the very first visit. I think I cried the whole entire hour, beyond a doubt. And as a matter of fact, a little bit of story there. I remember when they said Clark, visitation, and I remember I didn't want to go because I had no idea who was down there waiting for me, and I wasn't in a good frame of mind and for shocks and surprises. But I also remember when I turned the corner and saw it was you and your mom. I was kind of like, okay, like I'm okay here. And then the second time when they called me for visitation, I just assumed it was you again. So I was good to go. But what was the process of understanding when visitation was, getting into visitation? Like, what was that whole process like? Because I have no idea.
The process was stupid. I didn't feel like I could get straight answers. I felt like I had to like look at the website and call. And I probably called 5, 6, 7 times. And I even remember, I thought we maybe visited you 3 times. I don't know. But I remember going down there telling mom, like, I hope we're compliant. Like, I hope we're, at the right time, the right day, and the process of just getting to the point of knowing when you could visit, and then knowing what you could wear, what you could, it was exhausting from the outside. And I get it from a perspective of you're detained. So like they have to mitigate certain things. You know, they don't want weapons in there. They don't want this in there. And I understand like security protocol, but I was just like, I just feel like the information was not abundant of here's how you can visit these people. Because my whole thought from the very beginning, from the point of writing you to visiting you, was you're human. I didn't really care what happened. I don't care if there was a whole trail of stuff that landed. It didn't matter. Like, you're human. And people, I don't know, you have feelings, like you need connection, right? And I knew that about you. And so that's why I just started writing. Like, I remember I would write you letters. I put crossword puzzles in there. I put jokes in there. I put Bible verses in there. I would just write stupid stuff I was doing just so you could laugh, because it's connection. And so that was where the visitation, but I remember driving down there, not 100% sure if we were on the right day, the right time, if we were wearing the right things, I didn't know if they would let mom in the wheelchair. I didn't know.
Yeah, interesting. And then when you got to the facility, and like I know, I assume that they patted you guys down or ran you guys through some kind of security.
Yeah, you go through like the metal detectors, and if you have any, I don't know, they will pat you down. I know I got in trouble for having an underwire bra. So literally, I went to the car, grabbed a knife, cut the wire out of my bra, and pulled it out and threw it in the truck. Because I was like, oh, I just never thought about an underwire bra being an issue. So I literally just went outside and did it. Another time, I showed up in a pair of sandals, open toe shoes. Nope, can't have open toe shoes. So I raced down to the closest store. I told mom, I said, if you get called, just go in without me. Just go in and visit without me. I ran down, got me a pair of ugly, ugly shoes and put them on so that I could go in, just so I could follow the rules to get in.
You know, it's interesting, and only because I want to make that point very clear to anybody who's listening to this, is I was detained in an immigration facility, as in I wasn't incarcerated in a jail or a prison system. I wasn't there due to any kind of heinous crimes or any kind of crimes that were harmful to anybody else. As in, you know, domestic violence or assault or any of those kind of things. And yet here we are, you know, being patted down and searched to the point where, you know, it was ran much like a prison or a jail aspect that way. And interestingly enough, just before my very first visit there in visitation, I had never been into that visitation quarters before. But I can remember I had been detained for quite some time, I think, before your first visit. So I was detained a total of 10 months. I was detained for, I want to say, a good couple of months before your first visit. They used to brag that the visitation center had vending machines that we could get snacks at, or that you guys could buy us snacks at and stuff, because we obviously didn't have any money on us, and that everybody was able to kind of like catch up on lack of affection, for lack of better words. And by the time you had gotten around to visitation, the vending machines had been removed due to them being abused. And also we were then told that we could hug hello and hug goodbye, but there was to be no touch, no touching after that, like even holding hands or, you know, you consoling me, touching my shoulder and stuff. And I remember our very first visitation, we were across from each other at a table with a wooden board between us, remember? So that, and the wooden board, my friends, was only probably, you know, 3 or 4 inches high, but it was just enough that you couldn't slide your hands, you know, to one another to even hold hands or whatever without coming up onto this board. And then obviously being seen by whatever guard happened to be on duty that way. So,
and I guess that's funny that you say that, because I know that they told us we couldn't have anything in our pocket, no money, no nothing. So I guess you're right, that would have been taken away before then, because I was just thinking as you're saying that, I'm like, well, how would I have got you something out of the vending machine? They told me nothing in my pockets.
Yeah, so. At one point there was vending machines. And don't get me wrong, there were people that were detained with us that 100% had some addiction issues and stuff like that. And typically the visitation was where some of those things were slid across. And I knew that information from being in there with them. But and so, you know, it was always the talk on the jail side of it all was, you know, a couple of people had blown it for the rest of us, and the opportunities that could have been there, which is the same of true society, we find, right? It's always a
Well,
couple people kind
and
of,
the thing was, is I started writing you, and I just started sticking something in the mail every single day.
you did.
And I was staying at mom's house, and she's like, "What are you doing? Like, what do you?" Because I would just keep stealing stamps from her
Yeah.
because I was too lazy to go buy my own stamps. And so then she got in on writing you because she was like, "Oh, so we're just sending love, we're just sending humor," and she like knew of you, but she didn't really like know you at the time. So I just thought, having something good, positive coming in every day or every other day, however they deliver mail, would be, hopefully keep your spirits higher.
Yeah, and that's one of I didn't bring very much back across the border being deported with me, but that was one of all the cards you and your mom sent, and sometimes they're colored, and your mom put like little articles in it sometimes too. And, I will say, I've never held back that I lived a very white privileged life in there. And in that case, in some of the mail too and stuff, it was interesting. While I was in Australia jail, they would even take the stamps off the mail coming in, because in their mind the stamps could have been licked or patted down with some kind of narcotic. Eloy was a little bit more friendlier that way, but they would call us to the front of we call them pods, and there's 50 women to a pod, and they would say, "Clark, you got mail," and I would stand there while someone else opened the mail. Like, so I didn't even get to open my own mail for the first time. Every time open the mail, and they would look through it, and then they would hand it to me. And now they didn't open it unless you were there. So my mail wasn't opened until I was present. So I will say that. But there was a couple of times when you guys sent some fancy cards that were like the 3D cards.
Oh, yeah.
And stuff. And boy, they didn't like those ones, because in their mind, that 3D buffer had the opportunity to have something stuffed in between it. But again, so I want to keep going back to that. I was detained. I wasn't in jail or prison. And so it's interesting, like how it was much more than just a detention facility. It was, in my opinion, and all of our opinions, a full-blown incarceration. So I signed my deportation on May 7th, and it took them till the end of June before they moved me. And so I share where you were at with all of that process of waiting for me to be moved and out of there. And
well, I remember even before you signed your deportation, you and I had written back and forth a couple of times about like sponsorship, right? And that whole process, it didn't make sense. I didn't know what I was responsible for, what you were responsible for. Like, I read all the stuff, I talked to people, but there was no information. Like, it didn't. And so I felt like when you told me you signed your deportation, I'm like, I wish I could have done more. I wish I could have done the sponsorship side, but I didn't understand it. And if I didn't understand it, what were the consequences for me? Or were there worse consequences for you if, so when you signed your deportation, and I immediately went into, okay, what can she take back across with her? How can we send stuff? And so I remember calling, and you would get people who were complete assholes. They're like, they can't take nothing. And I'm like, well, that's not what your website says, so let's go over it. And I remember asking questions like, can I put a phone in there? Can I put money in there? Can I put your Canadian IDs in there? And they told me no to all of that. So we ended up putting some more money on your books, because they said that your books would get cashed out. So you would get that. And we put clothes in there. I think I put a couple books in there, just stuff so that and it was stuff that was yours, and then stuff that Mom and I had purchased new. But even just the process to find out, like, legally, so that I'm not getting you in trouble, I'm not getting me in trouble, what can I put in there? And I know they're going to search it. And like, how much can it weigh and all these things. So we went out and bought a suitcase, put all this stuff in there, but they don't make it simple for people to follow the rules. Like, they want you to follow the rules, and I'm okay with following the rules, even though I'm a rule breaker, but they didn't make it easy. So I'm just like, and the Canadian IDs, that's a whole, like, that just chaps my tail. Like, I should have been able, I found out later from a client of mine that is an immigration agent, I guess what do you call it. I didn't know that that's what she did. And I asked her, I said, so I have a question. When my friend was deported, and I built a suitcase and I dropped it off and they searched it. I had her Canadian IDs and they made me take them back. Just your birth certificate, I think a driver's license, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's all I had.
And they made me take it back. I said, I'm not trying to put her Arizona stuff in there. And my friend told me that, yes, I could have put it in there because they don't hand you any of that until you're actually on Canadian soil. So it wouldn't have mattered. And then I was pissed. I was just like,
Well, and you know what's interesting on that side, part of it or whatever, and so I can remember them shifting me around a little bit. And at one point, I was put in segregation, the whole in Albany, New York, because they didn't want me in with general population because I wasn't staying long. And they had lost a lot of my paperwork, and so I had to wait for all that to become back across. And another segment in this podcast, we'll talk about the Canadian consulate and that aspect of it. But it was interesting because when they did get me to the border point, I was left at that border with absolutely no ID. And I remember Annette, my friend, I called and said I'm okay because she was kind of being the catalyst for everybody in the communication. And she was like, "Oh, I'll send you some money." "You can't, my friend. I have no ID." "I'll get you a hotel room," because sleep deprivation was very real at the end. And I was like, "You can't. I had no ID." And so I spent my first night free in the Toronto bus station, is what I always tell everybody. It's true. And I had the best hot dog of my life, no lie. But I also remember when I got out when I first got back across into Canada, I went out to Prince Edward Island. And I remember you tried to send me my ID then too.
So I tried to send it. Well, hold on. Let me go back to when you got transferred. Okay. So you signed your deportation paperwork, which was so nerve-wracking because then they don't tell you when you're getting deported. And I probably asked 100 times. I was like, "You don't understand. I got to know. I got to know when she's leaving. I got to know." And I fully believe that you actually got dropped on the East Coast of Canada rather than the West Coast because I kept bugging them. Because I said, "Well, where is she getting dropped?" They said, "We can't tell you that information." I was like, "You don't understand. She doesn't have anybody in the West Coast. There's nobody in the West Coast. She only has people in the East Coast." So, but I can understand why they don't tell you, but I probably, in conversation with trying to get the suitcase to you, trying to find out your deport, like I asked a lot of questions and they were probably sick of me. But I feel like you did get dropped on the East Coast because of all the prompting. And I remember there was one gentleman that I talked to, and it was probably honestly him. I don't remember his name, but he was just very compassionate. I'm like, "Do you understand? If you drop her on the West Coast, that could be very, very detrimental because she doesn't know anybody there." And I just really poured my heart out into it. And so when I could no longer see you on the website in Eloy, I panicked. I was like, "Okay, she's gone." And I didn't sleep. I was like, "She's gone." And you don't show up until they have like put you in Albany, right? When I saw that you were in New York, I cried. I was like, "Oh, thank God, she's on the East Coast." Like it was such a relief. I mean, they don't even tell you, right? You didn't know where you were going. And it was such a relief that you were on the East Coast at that point. And I just remember checking that website, and then you were gone from Albany, and I'm like, "Okay, I don't know where she is." Like it was emotional to not know where you were. To literally your name was on the website and then it's gone. So you're just out there. It was weird. And then I remember getting the first call from you, which was, and you told me you were on Canadian soil, and that was just the best.
Yeah, it's, from my perspective, it's interesting. I signed my deportation May 7th, and it took 6 weeks to move me. And they don't tell us either. 100% they don't tell us. You just get, and it literally, when they call you to leave, they call it roll up. It's in the middle of the night. And so it's like a 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning kind of situation where they wake you up to just go. But I remember that whole aspect happening and then getting to Albany and stuff. But I also know that, even I was misplaced for 2 or 3 days because they lost track of me, and yet I'm inside one of their facilities. Mm-hmm. And I get it. I mean, part of me wants to show some grace that there's so many people that they detain, and so therefore it's part of it and stuff. But it's interesting, that whole disappearing thing, because there's so much in the news now about those detention facilities and people literally just, disappearing and not knowing where they are. And when they drop you, if they drop you at a board, they don't ask. Like, there's no transition back to real life. I mean, I was grateful to be surrounded by community and people like family like you that helped me. But if I had been dropped in the West Coast, you're right. I mean, I would have been stuck out there with no money, no ID, no means of getting money. And that's why I think there's so many folks that get dropped into different countries where, that's where they go, to the streets. And so, and then you quickly adapt to your surroundings, and incarceration taught me that. I mean, here I am, who's someone who's never done any kind of narcotics and never been, detained or incarcerated and, that kind of stuff. And that now all of a sudden I've got this jail lingo and this jail brain, and, could survive and function in that area. It was mind blowing that way. But yeah. And so I know that you were trying to track me down, and I was grateful that whoever was pushing for the East Coast, because the Canadian consulate wasn't pushing for anything whatsoever. And the deportation process is literally, they can drop you whatever border they want, whatever happens to be convenient for them at the time. So that was huge.
And I even talked to somebody from the Canadian consulate, and they said, there's nothing we can do. It's all on the US immigration side. Because I was like, fine, I'll skip the US side. I'll talk to the Canadian side. Maybe I'll get like help. And they said that literally there's nothing. And it just, like I said, the whole transfer, like that whole process of if they drop you somewhere that you have no support, what's literally to stop you from trying to come back in? And that's across, I don't know, that's just me, because I'm like, you drop them over there. You were fortunate to be dropped with a bag of stuff that we packed for you, but many people don't even have that. And if you don't have your ID, if you didn't get picked up with your IDs or whatever, and I hate to think what would have happened to your Canadian IDs had you had them on you and went into the facility. They probably would have lost them.
Yeah, 100%. And this being said, like, whatever you're picked up with is what you have. And I was picked up in my home. And so therefore I left my wallet, my cell phone, and all that stuff behind. But even then, when you do get out with a cell phone, I mean, what good is it 10 months later? Who's been paying the bills, right? It makes a huge difference that way. And then I remember we have about 3 minutes left. So I remember when you mailed me my ID, and
oh yeah. So Mom and I packed 2 big old 18 by 18 size boxes full of clothes, books, all kinds of stuff, winter clothes, and I stuffed your IDs in there. And they literally sent it back and told me I mailed contraband. They didn't tell me what the contraband is, so I'm digging through the box going, what did I put in there? The only thing it was your IDs, and honestly, I was determined to get you your IDs, so I stuck them in greeting cards one at a time and sent them across. And I have felt that ever since then, my name connected with your name crossing US Customs has been flagged because I've had stuff opened.
Isn't it? Wow, that's interesting. Actually, I didn't know that part. Isn't that interesting? But I do remember that you tried to get them up to me the one time and they didn't get up here. And then you did send me greeting cards to get them across, and they finally got across. And that way, at least I could, go out and get them. What's the word I'm looking for? Like brought up to date, renewed, and all of that stuff. Yeah. And at least prove who I was, for Pete's sakes, because up until that point, I couldn't even prove that
they just said contraband. They didn't say, and I'm thinking, okay, your name is on a deportation list, but those are your Canadian IDs. Again, I wasn't sending US documents. Why would you not be allowed to have your Canadian things in Canada? I don't understand.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. What a journey. I just, it's interesting. And like I said, and then I got out and was able to see some of the ripple effect of friends and my social life and coming across and stuff. And I will say that was very, very wickedly painful. And even to this day, I mean, here we are 5.5 years later, and there's still folks that I'm not connected to based on their judgment of my circumstance. And literally to this day, they don't know my side or my story.
And it never affected them. So they judged it and it had no ripple effect on them directly.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Exactly right. It didn't have any ripple effect on them, and they don't understand, and there was a quote, and to this day, I don't know who wrote this quote, and I've searched it 1,000 different ways, but there's a quote out there that says, "We are not our choices. We are our reasons for our choices." And I love that quote in that aspect. And that's what made us start up, led me to this. And, the mission of, we're all about changing your perception based on our stories, because a lot of people, federal criminal, detained, deported, mug shots, incarcerated. There's a lot of labels that come with different stigmatisms because of it. Right. So
yeah,
that way. So thank you for being part of my journey. Thank you for being on podcast number 2 and sharing your part of my story, because I mean, you were the only one that in my whole circle that was just right there with me the whole dang way. I mean, Sandra and Annette, 100%, I honor them and their journey, their part in the journey with me big time. But yeah, you were right there beside it all and working it with me. And so I appreciate that big time. So anything else you want to share before I close?
Just thank you for inviting me to share, because I think that from the outside looking in, the system is broken and it's not fair, because at the end of the day, and you say this all the time, they're human. I got it. They came here illegally. It doesn't matter. They're human and we have to treat them like humans.
Yeah, great. That's a great way to end. Thank you for that.